I added something new to the pack. This is the PDS, Plasm Distribution System. Basically, it's Slime Blower Mark II, heavily modified from the earlier version.
We've been here for over an hour, Egon. You're just telling me about this now? Yeah, that's the stuff. The Ghostbusters video game is a tricky thing to talk about. As a game, it's just okay. But for a fan base that ravenously wanted another sequel, this was the best we were ever going to get. R.I.P. Harold Ramis. You were too good for this world. Considering games tend to get locked down to their era, and this game included voices and writing of almost everyone from the original movies, it makes sense to keep this game available in whatever ways possible. But this game was flawed when it was new, and 3D games tend to age rougher than most mediums. So where does this game land on the re-release / remaster scale? Let's dive in and figure it out. Ghostbusters is a solid representation of the game as it was originally released, warts and all. The game doesn't control incredibly well, but it's as serviceable now as it was back then. You may start shrieking at your TV every time some random whoosh knocks you down for 5 seconds. But when you can input commands, the response is prompt and appropriate. My biggest complaint about the docked mode is how noticeable the compression artifacts are in the cutscenes. It may be hard to notice through YouTube's own compression, but take my word for it, the pre-rendered cutscenes look aggressively pixelated on a large modern television. It's looking at the divide between the in-game fidelity and rough cinematics that shows Ghostbusters Remastered has at least gotten a resolution bump from its original release. Even comparing it to the handheld mode makes the upgrade obvious. The handheld mode is everything you could reasonably ask it to be. The entire game, from gameplay to menus to cinematics, look great on the 720p screen. The artifacts that are intensely apparent in docked mode cutscenes look perfectly fine here. Obviously, these CG movies were rendered for 720p displays, meaning this is kind of the best way to play on Switch by default. Controls are solid as ever, though if you struggle with shooter controls on a handheld Switch, this will cause you similar issues. Luckily, fast response times isn't regularly required here. Overall, Ghostbusters Remastered is a joy to play on the go, and adds a lot to this release. There's nothing I would expect or want from this version that isn't present and accounted for. I wouldn't have inherently considered this to be a perfect for Switch game, but I can't ignore how well it's earned that moniker. When this remaster was announced, my first thought was, I wonder if this will be based on the console or PC version. The footage made it clear it wasn't going to be a complete overhaul, but seemed like it might have at least been a solid PC-based upscaling. Ultimately, if the game has any improvements, I have trouble seeing them. The game looks slightly better than an Xbox 360 game, I guess? Ghostbusters looks fine. It's clearly aged, but the characters look like the actors portraying them. They just have a touch of that dead-eyed marionette aesthetic that always seems to crop up as computer graphics age. On top of that, the line delivery has a lot of instances of sounding really odd and unnatural. The characters' lines come out very stiltedly, as if each sentence was recorded days apart.
That's some highly sensitive equipment you're disintegrating there, kid.
As with everything else related to this game, whether Ghostbusters is exactly as it should be or showing its age depends on your own expectations and tastes. Now, I have to be honest about my feelings on Ghostbusters Remastered as a continuation of Ghostbusters. Some aspects of it have not aged well.
You know, I never forget a face attached to all the rest of that.
The credits say Harold Ramis and Dan Aykroyd wrote the script, but over time people have come out to say that's not entirely true. In fact, the majority of the dialogue seems to have been written by the developer studio, and that is now more apparent than ever. Certain parts of the game sound and feel like proper Ghostbusters, especially the shop talk spouted by Egon and Ray.
It's called arcing, a large pulse of psychic energy.
Winston also tends to sound like Winston, but that might be more of a testament to Ernie Hudson making the most of the material compared to the others. Sadly, the bulk of this game's script problems come from Venkman, played as unevenly as possible by Bill Murray. You can easily see when Murray thought his lines were terrible.
That approach rarely works with me. I'll show you why later.
Honestly, some of his zingers are so bad I don't even really get the joke. And Venkman doesn't seem to either.
Your mother and I are so proud, aren't we, Egon?
Peter chimes in every other line whenever he's in a scene, like a group of massive Ghostbusters fans got in a room and wrote anything they could think of for him. The problem is they think of the character as a persona rather than as a human being or actual character. The difference is that a persona is constant and unchanging, like a gimmick comedian or a one-note actor, and this disregards every ounce of character development Venkman had through the first two movies. Peter is back to treating women like objects of conquest, disregarding their agency as people and their personal wishes. It makes the game feel less like a continuation of beloved characters and more like a fanfiction cooked up by people with no real understanding of character progression or storycraft. The fact that the shtick is beaten into the ground and tired by the end of the second level further leads me to believe this was additions made by the game studio. It's just too tone-deaf and blind for me to believe the original writers of the franchise could muck it up this badly.
What's that supposed to mean? I'm a chubby chaser?
I took out one plump girl on a blind date, like her personality, and you guys can't let it go.
Now, before anybody gets too angry, I'll say that most everything outside of Venkman ranges from believable as a Ghostbusters sequels to downright good. My favorite moments dealt with chasing ghosts with Egon and Ray, as their characters are virtually always on point, and it was when the game felt most like hanging out with the true Ghostbusters.
What are those? I don't recognize them from Tobin.
No. They're in the revised Ethieri catalog. I think the Grey Lady is constructing them from the books and minor spirits here.
But one last critique. The checkpoints in this game are straight up bad. Too many times did I repeatedly die right at the end of a sequence because of some physics screw-up on the game engine side, leaving me to have to trigger the same events and hokey lines over and over. The worst part is these checkpoints force you to hear jokes that were bad the first time ad nauseum, drilling home how funny the writers thought they were being versus the reality of it.
Now see if he wants s'more. Get it? I'm funny too, you know.
As a game, this is nothing special. But as the only continuation of a globally beloved set of characters, this game is a massively precious thing. That makes this a uniquely difficult product to judge. If considered as a modern product, there's a lot to knock about the production quality, the voice acting, and the general gameplay. However, as a way of playing this pop-culturally important game a decade later in 2019, it's exactly what you'd expect it to be. If you love the original Ghostbusters, you'll get quite a bit out of experiencing this game, even with all of the flaws. But if you're not an intense fan of the source material, this might be one to skip. Either way, nothing about the Switch version will alter however you fall on this game.
You said. Why leave the building, you said. It'll be quiet, you said. You know you're fired.
You're right. I secretly knew our lives would be in danger and thought, hey, I'll make sure I trap Mark with me inside an elevator!
Excuse us?